Hi, everybody. By way of quick introduction reminder, I'm Eli Varhegyi. I'm a MQ-9 pilot out at Cannon Air Force Base. And just based on the recent course content focus on joint operations, I wanted to mention the joint deployment I had the opportunity to go on. So I was the ISR battle captain for a deployment with JSOC in the summer of 2017. We were about 25 miles away from Raqqa working, and I got to work directly for an Army O5 and also directly with the JTECs out there and the J2, who happened to be an E7. And so that experience was great just for some joint knowledge of how the Army does things and how they see things, and getting to understand how to explain air capabilities to the Army. All right, so now right into the content. So the key takeaways from the self-paced content that I found so far. So I'm just going to focus on one, which I think is really important, and I'll get into why. So this was not my first exposure to the effects-based approach, but I think that, or EBA, I think that EBA is an absolutely crucial methodology for the Air Force. So it is the methodology that underlies the weapons school, but the course material is a good synopsis of the approach. So I think there are really two reasons why it's important. It applies to operations, and it applies more generally to I think everyone's job in the Air Force. So on the operations side of things, it gives a problem-solving process for tactical, operational, strategic level problems. And it's a pretty simple methodology, but it works really well. So you start with the target or your desired effect, and you work backwards to find a solution. So on the tactical side of things, if you're trying to strike a particular factory, you can define mission success by the effects you want to have on that factory, and then you work backwards and you figure out how to successfully force package to get the job done. So what you don't do is you don't just have a bunch of airplanes show up in an AO and then figure out how to best use them. Figure out what you're trying to do, then figure out what you need to get the job done. So that's kind of the tactical side of things, but the methodology applies just as well outside of the operational arena. So it is important because it avoids what I think is a critical mistake that we often make, which is we measure motion as progress. We just assume if we are doing things that we are making progress, and that's not necessarily true. So I have a theory that maybe it's because of the kind of bullet style of accomplishments that we use, but we usually really don't have good metrics to measure if we're being successful. So again, if we start by defining the desired end state, whether it's a program we're trying to create, a new capability that we're trying to field, or any type of non-operational problem that we're trying to solve, then that gives us, it lets us build a roadmap to measure whether or not we are being successful. So maybe this is kind of cheesy, but a quotation from Albert Einstein that drives this home to me is he's credited as saying, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. That highlights that you really have to understand what you're trying to do before you flail around doing a bunch of things, having a bunch of meetings, and think that you're being successful just because you're filling up your time. So a concrete example of this is the way my squadron is set up. We have two flights. One trains on our various certifications and qualification programs, while the other flight flies our downrange mission, and then the two flights swap. So the question is, how should the flight that's in training go about doing that training? The way that we have done it for a while now is we match available people, the crews that are available, with the available hardware, and we try to fit as much training as possible into the schedule. On face value, that makes sense because we're trying to optimize time, right? But one of the first things that I changed as when I took over as one of the ADOs was to decide to define the problem set we were trying to solve of how do we get after training, by saying, okay, figure out how many crew members with each cert we need to go into the next combat rotation. Then once we have that end state defined, we build the training plan to make sure that we have enough crew members with that cert going into that rotation. So it's maybe a subtle change in thinking, but it really helps, like in this example, a training plan be way more effective and get after the problem we're actually trying to solve instead of just training for the sake of training. All right, so now on to part three, the two most critical issues I think for the Air Force right now. The first is culture. So I think we have a culture problem, and we need to change it by focusing on creating a culture of the most capable and lethal operators possible. That is what I think success would look like for the Air Force. That means every decision that anyone who is in the position to make a decision, every decision they have to make, ask themselves, will this make us a more capable or a more lethal force? If yes, press. If no, then is this thing absolutely necessary? And if it's not, get rid of it. So we need people who are dangerously good at their actual jobs, and I think we have gotten away from that. I think if we can successfully change the culture to reflect the way that I think it should be, then it will help solve a couple of the symptomatic problems that the Air Force faces. So I think this retention of talent being a big one, I think that is a symptom of a culture problem. I don't think it's a problem in and of itself. It is a symptom of something else. And also just the ballooning of additional duties. I think we all know that we spend a ton of our time doing things that don't relate to our actual job. And I would argue that, at least from what I've seen, a ton of it is not value added. All right, so that's the first one, change the culture. And then I think if we can change the culture, help retain talent, get rid of some additional duties, it'll free up resources for people to get after this second problem, which I think is also crucial, which is that we need to start training for tomorrow's war, and we need to train across communities for tomorrow's war. So O-plans based on the 2018 NDS, I think, are woefully lacking. I've been involved in some planning for both on the USAFE side and out in PACOM, and we are really behind at the operational level. And since we are operationally behind, then we don't have good metrics. We cannot gauge if we're creating realistic tactical problems for us to solve when we go out and train. We know we're going to face difficult tactical problems because our technological advantage is either shrinking or gone, but we don't know if we're creating the right ones to train to because we don't know what the operations are going to look like. So we really need to define what those operations are going to look like in line with the 2018 NDS. So that's what I've got. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to the discussion with everybody.